Video game consoles over the years have had a handful of classic fighting games that have defined generations of gamers. From Street Fighter to Tekken to Mortal Kombat to Super Smash Bros., each game has garnered legions of followers dedicated to honing their skills through practice and competition. So it's really no surprise that board game designers and publishers have continually looked for new ways to translate the digital world of fighting games into a purely tabletop experience. Well, today's video focuses on one such game, Knockdown, a two-player, quick-playing fighting game that comes from Awaken Realms Lite and designer Adam Klipinski, both names that you might recognize from wonderfully produced games like Lords of Hellas and Nemesis. And just as its name implies, Knockdown is a card-driven fighting game where you represent a single fighter whose sole purpose is to knock down your opponent in 2 of the game's 3 possible rounds, but with a twist, which I promise I will get back to in just a moment. The pieces that you're going to see here today are all in prototype form, including the 3 fighters that were provided to us for use in this preview. So in other words, all of the cards, miniatures, tokens, and wooden cubes will likely change by the time your copy delivers to your doorstep. So please make sure that you check their Kickstarter page for a look at the game's final art and components. Now, each game of Knockdown begins with a player choosing a single fighter and collecting their matching miniature and fighter sheet, which conveniently lists all the special skills and combos that are available to that player. The fighters that we have today all come from one of Awaken Realms' original games, Siege Storm, with additional fighters being added throughout the Kickstarter campaign for some of their other popular properties and games. Next, players will set up the game's arena using the game's box lid and bottom, showing both a panorama of the fighter's location as well as housing the 8 spaces in which fighters will move and are placed at the start of combat. Players then draft 2 skill cards that provide even more unique abilities to their fighter, choosing one of these skill cards to place face up and the other skill card to flip face down. The face-up card will remain active throughout all 3 of the game's possible rounds, while the face-down card will only come into effect if a player loses one of the rounds in combat, effectively allowing them to catch up with their opponent. In Knockdown, although players will start with the same hand of starting attack cards, 2 of which they will choose to discard at the start of the game to determine the game's starting player, the fighters themselves do not have a hand of unique cards that are specific to their chosen character. Instead, a communal attack deck will always be shuffled and used at the start of each game. Now, this attack deck has all the game's possible cards that players will both collect into their hands for powering their combos that are listed on their fighter sheet, as well as triggering the powerful attacks that are listed on the cards themselves. Each round, the active player will have access to 4 face-up cards that are randomly dealt from the attack deck and placed face-up in front of the arena, effectively named the basic attack row. Now, during a player's turn, they may take 2 and only 2 of the game's 4 possible actions in any order of their choice, even choosing the same action twice: move, draw, rest, or combo. Move is just as it sounds and allows players to move their fighter forward or backward 1 space in the arena, noting that miniatures may never move through nor occupy the same exact space. Draw allows a player to select a single card from the basic attack row, dealing the amount of damage that is listed on the card to their opponent, but only if their miniature is within the exact range that is listed on the card. And just as the name implies here, draw will mean that that card will go into the player's hand for later use. Damage in Knockdown comes in 2 different forms, light wounds and heavy wounds, each of which was represented with a single set of colored cubes, with the difference being that light wounds can be healed throughout a round of combat, while heavy wounds simply cannot. Rest is the 3rd action, which allows players to heal damage that they have taken by discarding half of their light wounds rounded down, back into the supply. And remember what I said, during a round of combat, those heavy wounds can never be removed. And the last action is Untitled Combo, which allows players to discard any number of cards in their hand that match the string of symbols on their fighter sheet, which allows them to power each of their combos once per turn, having powerful effects that they're going to deal to their opponent. Like any good card game, there are many possible ways to block damage using your own set of skills, cards, or abilities. So hand management plays a very important part in each decision that is made with your two actions in the game, and requires players to sometimes choose to keep cards in their hand for defense instead of constantly remaining on the attack. And these subtleties become more and more apparent as you become more accustomed to the ebb and flow of the game's combat. And remember at the beginning of this video when I said that the game was about knocking out your opponent twice in 3 rounds, but with a twist? Well, that twist comes in the form of a knockdown test. Damage in Knockdown isn't handled with a health tracker or with players having an X amount of hit points, but instead with one's ability to control and manage their light and heavy damage cubes that they have in front of them during each round of combat. In Knockdown, anytime that you damage your opponent with a heavy wound, you may instead remove that wound from their damage pool and force your opponent to perform what is called a knockdown test, where the player must now physically stack all of their collected damage, both light and heavy, into a single stacked tower in just 10 seconds. Now, if they do so, they survive for at least one other round, but if they fail, they are knocked out, and if they've been knocked out twice, they lose the game. Now, for players who don't enjoy the dexterity element of the game, there is a dice variant where players can roll dice and compare that result to their current damage pool instead. But in my experience with this game so far, the game becomes far more interesting with the dexterity elements included because it forces players to actively manage their actions and their decisions based solely on how well they believe they can handle their current level of damage if they're ever faced with a knockdown test at any given moment. And those are the basic elements of Knockdown. However, there are many layers to this game that I'll let you explore on your own. If you have any questions, please feel free to make them in the comments below. And as always, make sure that you check out their Kickstarter page for all the game's final rules and components. And again, thanks for watching. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, please consider dinging the bell below. That's going to notify you of all the new videos that are uploaded to our channel. Give us a big ol' thumbs up, subscribe, and as always, you consider watching all of our other videos on the channel, one of which is right here to my left.